Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
Hello and a very warm welcome. I'm delighted to be joined by Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, who is IDF spokesperson. So thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and speaking to us. It's an honor hosting you for the interview.
Thank you. Great to.
I want to start the conversation with a little overview, if you could provide us, about the current situation in Gaza and what are the main objectives of the IDF are in the region at this time.
The current situation remains that we have three core goals. I would say, first of all, to bring back the hostages, every last one of them. Second of all, to dismantle Hamas as a governing authority, as a terrorist entity of the Gaza Strip. And third of all, to bring back and restore perhaps the security situation, to improve the security situation to the people of Israel and create a better security situation. So those three goals, they are the directive that the government handed us down on the 7th of October after the most brutal attack Israel has faced. Those goals accompany us as we speak and are the guiding principles of how we are conducting ourselves on the battleground.
And we see the current focus of the war is in the Khan Yunis area and southern Gaza. So could you elaborate on the specific challenges you're facing in this area and the strategies employed to address them at this point of time?
So first of all, our operations have shifted to a different stage of the war. There's indeed a very extensive effort in the south, in Khan Yunis, which is a very, very substantial hub of Hamas's operations. It is the birthplace of Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Def. They feel very, very much at home there. It is a place where several of the hostages abducted into Gaza were taken to the underground tunnel system in that area. And so what we understand is that Khan Yunis is a location which we need to dismantle the infrastructure that Hamas has established there, seek out and destroy the tunnel system, and hopefully find the hostages or create the conditions for hostage release. I can say that we have have conducted extensive operations in the eastern areas, in the southern areas of Khan Yunis, and now the efforts are much more focused towards the west. And as the operation continues, we will utilize our division, airborne division, to conduct and continue their operations. On the other hand, though, I think it's important to emphasize that our operations in the north haven't ceased. They've just shifted into a different level of intensity, a level of rapid mobilization to address specific threats as they evolve and as the intelligence comes in. After dismantling all of Hamas's battalions in the north, there remain terrorists, and when they are trying to regroup or conduct attacks against our forces that are positioned in and around the northern areas, the intelligence comes in, and this is what we've been doing over the last few days. For instance, in the areas of Shati, there are operations, extensive combat over the last few days. We've killed tens of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists that have tried to regroup, and this is the nature of the warfare. It is shifting into a more flexible, I would say a more fluid, once we've dismantled the infrastructure, the main infrastructure in the north, what remains is to deal with specific terrorists and terrorist threats that are evolving, and that is why we can shift to a slightly different modus operandi.
And among all this, while we see the ground operations are also happening, I was in Kafar Raza a couple of weeks back and I could still hear the airstrikes as well. So the airstrikes are still continuing in the Gaza at this point of time as well?
So the nature of our combat, I would say, first of all, on the ground operation is probably the 360-degree threat that we face from the tunnels, from sniper positions, from anti-tank guided missiles, drone activity, operating in partially destroyed urban environment, which poses a challenge, booby traps, improvised explosive devices. What we've done in order to address those challenges is a very, very clear set of operational principles. The operational principles would be, first of all, when we mobilize carefully, accurately, with a very, very straightforward operational plan. Secondly, I would say the activity is slow and secure maneuvering with extensive defensive efforts. So we don't want to leave our rear exposed to Hamas terrorists. Thirdly, it's all accompanied by extensive combat engineering capabilities, these capabilities that help us dismantle explosive devices, destroy and unearth tunnels and access points to tunnels. And of course, it all is conducted under the extensive coverage of aerial support. So the nature of the operations is very, very, I would say, both straightforward, elaborate, and very, very strong and decisive on the ground.
And while we're talking about the ground operations, one of the major stronghold of Hamas has been the tunnels. And there have been news actually in the morning that the IDF is flooding the tunnels. So could you elaborate a little bit on how you're combating the tunnel infrastructure, especially in Gaza, with advancements of new technologies? Is IDF utilizing technologies, or how are they neutralizing these tunnels effectively?
So I can't go into all of the techniques, technologies, and tactics that we have, but over the course of the last 10 years, we have developed, and indeed yesterday we revealed and confirmed the fact that we have utilized flooding capabilities in order to address some of those tunnels. But each tunnel and each operation is, I would say, principally based. It's based on what we know about the specific tunnel, what the type of threats are posed from that specific tunnel, what are the specific mission that we are trying to achieve. So it's just one of the tools in our arsenal, among other things such as robots, and of course combat. We conduct combat beneath ground. Last 3 nights ago, we revealed that our special forces conducted operation in a tunnel in Khan Yunis that ended up with a standoff with Hamas terrorists in a closed door behind a blast door, and at the end they turned themselves in and they were detained and taken back for questioning. And this is the nature of, I would say, the combination of utilizing technologies, techniques, and tactics to dismiss the perceived advantage that Hamas thought they had with the tunnel system.
And one of the major contentions during the war has been the public relations part, especially with the ongoing war. There have been some criticism from the international community on how the IDF is actually going with the military operations in Gaza. So for our viewers, could you try to explain how the IDF is balancing the need for military operations with trying to minimize the civilian casualties and damage to infrastructure?
We perceive the humanitarian effort as a strategic enabler for our operations. The people of Gaza are not the enemy of Israel or the IDF. And as such, we are conducting a humanitarian effort that is combined, I would say, with 3 core ideas. First of all, population evacuation, to get people temporarily out of harm's way. In our view, that is key. It helps us evacuate people from the battleground so that we can conduct our combat, and it gets them into safer places, out of the harm's way, as I said. So that's one core component. The second component is the efforts to maintain an ongoing flow of humanitarian supplies, whether it's medical supplies or food supplies or shelter for tents and so on. And this is done through the assistance of the international humanitarian organizations that are operating in Gaza. We have daily meetings with them to assess the situation and deliver the goods in order to maintain that ongoing flow. And the third component of the humanitarian effort is the challenge that Hamas have placed on the issue of hospitals. Hospitals have become and are a core component of Hamas's concept of operations in Gaza. I say that with a very, very clear understanding that hospitals are for healing. Hospitals should not be used to hold hostages. And this is precisely what Hamas has done. Hospitals should not be used as a transit position to move between Hamas's combat battalions and their centers of operations. The hospitals should not be used as access point to the tunnel systems. And this is what we've found. Every hospital we've gone to, from the Shifa hospital, the biggest hospital in Gaza, to the Rantisi hospital, to the Qatari hospital, to Kamal Adwan hospital, every single hospital we've gone to, we found weapons, tunnel system, communication capabilities, access to the tunnel system. The tunnel systems that we've found have been feeding electricity and water off of the systems of the hospitals themselves. So it goes to show the institutionalization of the terrorist mechanism based off, feeding off, using as a parasite the humanitarian mission. This, of course, is a breach of international humanitarian law, a grave breach. Unfortunately, we have yet to hear the World Health Organization say anything, raise alarm, concern, let alone condemn this brutal act against the people of Gaza. We have been left, if we understand that these hospitals are core hubs of Hamas's operations, then they need to be dealt with. And I would say when mobilizing on Shifa Hospital, not one person in the medical staff, not one patient, nobody was wounded or injured. We went in, we dealt with the infrastructure, we destroyed the infrastructure. And after leaving, the hospital is now back up and running. So from our perspective, those three components of the humanitarian mission are core. We understand it is our obligation, moral obligation, but also a professional obligation to facilitate the humanitarian situation on the ground. There has been over 170,000 tons of goods supplied to Gaza. This is not, it doesn't go without challenges. Of course, Hamas attacked the crossings. So he made many of them unfit. Hamas have commandeered goods, even goods from UNRWA, from the UN relief organization operating in Gaza. They took fuel supplies, they took medical supplies. They have no regard for the people of Gaza. And as such, we are left in a very, very clear, challenging situation where we want to continue humanitarian supplies, but we don't want those humanitarian supplies to be put in the hands of Hamas. This is the dilemma we face. The humanitarian efforts are ongoing. I can say every day for the last week now, we've had Israelis demonstrating at the crossings against the access of food supplies, medical supplies into Gaza. There's a very, very strong negative perception from the public of Israel against this. But nevertheless, we are continuing this effort because, as I said, we see it as a strategic enabler, but also the right thing to do.
And some of our viewers who might have missed those visuals, I have a couple of questions on this actually, because throughout the world, when you see conflicts, there are very few organizations I have seen, like the IDF, which put out video evidences of the operations, of in fact what they found out actually from the hospitals, from the schools. For our viewers, could you just lay out what were the visuals when you went inside the schools, the hospitals, the ammunition that you found inside them? If you could just talk a little bit about that.
Well, we have given extensive details about the nature of what we are finding on the ground, whether it has been the tunnels themselves, the vehicles that Hamas used to breach into Israel on the 7th of October, laden with weapons, with explosive devices, with AK-47 machine guns, with communications with vests, combat vests, We've seen the access points. We've seen utilization of incubators where they store handguns, the communication activity going, which is when you have a communication capability, you have the ability to control your forces and your operation as the operation goes on. And I would say that this reality is one where we challenge and realize that there is a need to distribute this information because the world expects us to, and we also expect to share with the world the failures of Hamas and how they are treating, abusing, and undermining the security and safety of the people of Gaza themselves. This is a very cynical step that they've done. It proves time and time again that they have no regard for human life, Israeli or Palestinian. We've shown places that we suspect hostages have been held. For instance, dungeons with gates, holding cells, where in Khan Yunis, in a tunnel system there. And this is basically the reality is very, very visual. It's very, very dramatic. And yes, the world should see what Hamas has done.
And while we are talking about the world should see this and take account, in the light of the recent the ICJ verdict, which have claimed that Israel is committing an act of genocide, I want to understand from the IDF perspective, does the IDF's approach to the situation of how they're approaching the war, the military strategy, or the engagement protocols, does it change after the verdict, or do they remain the same?
The IDF is operating within the realm of international law, international humanitarian law, and of course the rules of war, the laws of war. We continue to do so. We did so beforehand, and we will continue to do so. The debates in the ICJ are conducted by the government, by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Justice. That is their responsibility. Our role is to secure and restore safety and security to the people of Israel, to dismantle Hamas, and we are doing so within the realm of the laws of armed conflict.
So I have a few questions about the northern borders. Of course, it's not as clear as what is happening in Gaza, but still, the situation on the northern border with Hezbollah appears to be escalating every day. How does the IDF assess the current threat level, and what measures are being taken to ensure the security of Israel's northern border?
So the situation up north is very, very concerning for several reasons. First of all, Hezbollah is probably at least 10 times stronger than Hamas in their firepower, in their operational capability. They have some 200,000 rockets. The Nukhba force that Hamas used to breach Israel's border on the 7th of October, the Hezbollah equivalent is called the Radwan force, who have actual battle experience from the war in Syria. And Hezbollah's battle plan to conquer northern Israel has been widely published since 2012. So, of course, the level of threat is extremely, extremely high, both in their capabilities and perhaps in their intention. Nevertheless, and what we have seen over the last almost 4 months now, is a daily escalation of the border, of the tensions, of the efforts and of the attacks, with over 2,000 rockets, mortars, anti-tank guided missiles, sniper fire, machine gun fire, attacks, infiltration attacks even, or attempted infiltration attacks against Israel in the northern arena, across the border from Lebanon by Hezbollah in the south. Israel's policy is currently, I would say, defensive in essence. We have a defensive posture. We have recruited a huge amount of reservists to maintain the border and defend the border from infiltration. On the other hand, we have also evacuated tens of thousands of people from the border area, in a border area of 5 kilometers from the border with Lebanon. We've evacuated all of the civilians, all of the schools, all of the population. And that's around almost 100,000 people that have either evacuated or by order, by instruction. So, and several other thousands have just decided not to stay because of what the apparent threat. In the attacks, 16 Israelis have been killed. So it goes to show that there is a real threat. As we speak, I'm just having a report of an alarm coming in the northern areas, and so it's a daily routine that happens. Our policy is to strike against Hezbollah preemptively, taking out their capabilities across the border. We are pushing their hostile forces back from the border so that they are distant, so that they do not have the ability to conduct a breach, a rapid strike similarly that happened in the 7th of October and according to their battle plan. And we are putting a lot of effort and hoping that the diplomacy will remove Hezbollah from the south of Lebanon, as should be in accordance to UN Security Council Resolution 1701. Hezbollah should not be present in the south, should not have any weapons or capabilities to attack Israel in the south, and that needs to be realized. And I would say in parallel, the IDF is preparing itself for what may need to be mobilization against Hezbollah. This is the reality we need to be prepared for, because hope is not a method, and we have to have those tools ready.
And today in the morning, I guess we have seen the recent IDF strikes in southern Syria as well against the Syrian army positions, which have garnered attention. And this is not one of the first strikes. There have been a couple of more before as well in Syria. So could you provide insights on the objectives behind these strikes and how they align with the overall operational goals of IDF in the region?
What I was saying is Israel will conduct its operations against the perceived threats and realized threats from Lebanon, from Syria, as we did this morning, in the Red Sea against the enemies that are conducting hostilities against us, like the Houthis, and also from the West Bank. This is a reality that Hamas are trying to take advantage of. Iran, as an umbrella or hostile entity, is trying to take advantage of. We have very little patience and won't accept that our civilians will become be under threat from these hostile entities.
So I have a couple of last questions, and one of them actually is about the Judea-Samaria region. We have seen actually a couple of incidents here and there where we are seeing, like the operation in the hospital yesterday that the visuals came out. I wanted to understand about the fact that since most of the troops have been mobilized in the northern and the Gazan border, how are the security being managed in the West Bank, keeping in mind how fragile that region might also be?
So what we know about the West Bank is Hamas is very strong, has a strong presence, and perhaps even strong support in the West Bank. Our role is to make sure that that support isn't realized into real terrorist attacks against us. The operation in Jenin yesterday morning was within specific relation to Hamas terrorists that intended on conducting a huge attack against Israelis, a reality we could not allow, and that is why we conducted our counterterrorism operations as we did with special forces and so on. We are, and the security reality on the ground in the West Bank is one where we have sufficient forces to conduct operational activities, counter-terrorist activities, and seek out and hunt down terrorists hopefully before they're able to realize any of their plans. It is a challenge. What I've described in our short interview is Hamas in Gaza, Houthis from Yemen, Iranian proxies in Syria, Hamas and others operating in the West Bank, and Hezbollah obviously in the north in Lebanon. It just goes to describe that there is probably one stable characteristic of what's going on in this region. It's a very, very clear sense of instability. We need to be prepared for any eventuality. We can't let our enemies take advantage of the fact that we are determined to dismantle and destroy Hamas as a terrorist entity on our border that can threaten and implement the ruthless attack that they did on the 7th of October of abducting, killing, murdering, burning, beheading, massacring, raping Israelis. That is a reality we won't permit, and that is why we are fighting today.
So the last thing I wanted to ask you, again, this is a little broad probably for you to actually answer it for us, that in the light of the evolving geopolitical landscape as you just defined, how does the IDF envisions its strategic priorities in the coming months, especially knowing that the war will prolong for a while, in terms of regional security and broader international relations, especially with the hostage situation still at the moment?
The hostages are a top priority for the IDF, a national priority for Israel. Our role is to create the conditions on the ground that can bring the hostages home. Of course, there is a lot of diplomacy that is taking place as we speak. And from our perspective, as we held our fire on the last week of November, on the 24th of November, until the 1st of December, if that is realized once more, then we can hold our fire based on the instructions we are given by the government. Of course, we are very, very much focused on our core mission of defense and deterrence and dismantling and destroying Hamas specifically. The reality that Israel experienced on the 7th of October is a reality that we're not willing to have looming over our head ever again. And that is why we have no choice but to win this war.
Well, that's all the question that I have. Thank you so much for taking your time and speaking to us.
Thank you.